There you go.
Okay, we will call our meeting to order, and we need a motion to have Peter.
Oh, I will so move. I move that Peter Moynihan's request to attend today's meeting, the JMRL Board. Oh, no, it's the budget committee. Budget committee remotely due to personal matter, car trouble, be approved.
So no, all of you.
Aye.
You're in. Okay. Can you turn it back?
Yeah.
Okay. We are here to discuss the draft of the year 26 JMRL budget.
Okay. So I sent you all the draft that staff has prepared that includes the recommendations from the Personnel Committee that the board authorized last week. So I sent you a little bit of context too. I'm going to kind of go through the context of what are the big drivers and changes between the current year's budget and next year's budget. And then we'll go look at the draft document line by line. The goal here today is for, if the budget committee is happy with this, to make a recommendation that the full board review this for a potential vote in November, and then I'll send it off to the full board tomorrow or this afternoon. If there are changes that need to be made, if this committee decides, well, we want to see this or that, then Jerry and I will go back, hopefully not to the drawing board, but we will go back and make tweaks and send them out and then take it from there. Basically, if it's enough to say we want to see that change and then send it to the full board, great. If this committee needs to discuss again, then we can look at trying to convey something. So as I mentioned, the big drivers in the increase in the budget this year are the increase to the JMRL pay scale of 5% the board has been discussing, and a 2% raise for staff on top of that. So that was a sizable increase over the fiscal year 25 budget. $130,000 of software costs moved out of the equipment budget and into this operational budget. So that's one thing that this group can discuss today. It's one of the things that the board has been talking about since the spring, with the eye towards making some room in the equipment budget so that the board has maximum flexibility when they're thinking about whether or not to go fine-free for JMRL. So these are software costs that were in the equipment budget. 130,000 of them are now in the operations budget. We, for the first time in many years, are anticipating full funding or hoping for full funding of state aid in fiscal year 26. JMRL will either get the most or the second most amount of state funding in the state. So this budget also reflects using some of that to help offset the costs for some salary for our jurisdictions, basically to pay for some administrative costs in the salary line that then our jurisdictions wouldn't have to pay for. And then we're estimating here a 10% increase in healthcare costs for next year. We won't have those final numbers. As you know, that JMRL contracts with the city of Charlottesville for our healthcare benefits. They have not finalized what their numbers are going to be for next year. Once they do, we'll have to make an adjustment here, either up or down.
What was the increase last year?
I believe it was 11 or 12%. Alita asked me that as well. So yeah, 10% seems to be the safest bet these days. We did 10% last year, and then I think we had to adjust up after the budget was finalized. That's a great question.
I should actually start a little under 10, maybe ballparking it.
A little over 10.
Yeah.
The difference between 24 and 25.
Yeah.
Okay. Somewhere in that ballpark, hopefully. And then the only other thing that I mentioned was that the retirement costs that we used for the budget that you're looking at today are actually going to come down a little bit. We did get a final number on that. So that's about $8,500 in the next version of this that will go out for the board that are going to come off of those costs. It's not a tremendous savings, but it's a little bit. So Alita, if it is okay by you, we will just go take a look at this document.
I did have one question.
Please.
The monies that we're getting from the state, now we are able to use that part of that as for salary, right?
Yes, we can use it for salary, but only for certified librarians. That's the caveat. So somebody has to have a master's degree from an accredited school and then also apply to be certified with the state of Virginia. It couldn't be just for any staff. It would have to be for staff that meet this criteria.
And what percent of the staff fit that criteria?
I would say it's probably 30 to 35%, maybe 40, 30, somewhere in there. We went through a whole project where we realized that a lot of our professional librarians hadn't been certified. So this summer we went through and cleaned it all up. And I think total there were somewhere around 30 out of 125 staff, and we have all the substitutes included. Those are ballpark figures. We would want to use that. Well, we'll get to it when we get to that page, but we would want to use that in the administrative line so that every jurisdiction got some of the savings rather than, it wouldn't be fair to just use that for Lindsay's job, for example, which is split between Charlottesville and Albemarle. It wouldn't be fair for Louisa, Green, and Nelson. So in the administrative line, it's all 5 jurisdictions paying into it. Okay. We'll start with the beautiful cover. Thanks, Dan. It's very bright, clean. I like it. On to page 2, this is what internally I call the grid sheet, and it shows what our local jurisdictions are going to be asked for this year. So this is a good summary page, basically, of what we're asking each jurisdiction for. You'll notice at the very top, regional costs. That's what I just mentioned. We would want to take the state aid for salary in that line so that everybody gets a portion of it. These numbers, these percentages are a 3-year average of circulation per jurisdiction. So 60.13% for Albemarle, 23.96% for Charlottesville, 6% for Greene, 5.48% for Louisa, 4.43% for Nelson. So the entireties of these costs then are split up in that way. There's the administrative line, the technical services line. That's Meredith, Kayla, the ordering, processing of materials, and our IT team as well. And then 10% of reference services. This gets a little complicated, but it used to be all of reference was paid for regionally, but when the regional agreement changed in 2009-10, 10% of it is a regional cost, and then the rest of it is a Charlottesville Albemarle cost. So the totals for those costs are $2.2 million, and they're split up there amongst each jurisdiction for what they owe. Per the regional agreement, the jurisdictions each have to pay this before any changes get made to their own local costs. So if there's a dispute about funding, the regional agreement says this needs to be paid for first, then local costs. But hopefully we won't have that level of dispute to worry about. And we'll go through the pages that show what those costs are. This is just a summary page.
So where would that portion would be under administrative?
Yeah, it has already been removed. Correct, Jerry? So the reality of the costs for administration there are $150,000 more, but instead that's not being paid by the local jurisdiction. It's going to be paid by the state. It'll get reflected when we get to the administration page. Okay, so costs from the central library are split between Charlottesville and Albemarle over a 3-year average of how the circulation works there. It's 54% Albemarle, 45% Charlottesville. So their total costs are $1.9 million, and it's a little over $1 million for Albemarle, $881,000 for Charlottesville. That includes 90% of the cost of reference. The other 10% are the regional costs above. Gordon Avenue, 46% used by Albemarle, 53% by Charlottesville, so they split that $594,000. North side is a hair under 80% for Charlottesville, about 20% for Charlottesville. It's $2.4 million to run this building. Then we get into the single jurisdiction cost. So Scottsville's, the cost to run Scottsville is paid for only by Albemarle. It's $283,000. Same for Crozet, owned by Crozet, $636,000. The local cost at Louisa, just by Louisa, is $339,000. Same for Nelson, $296,000. Greene, $308,000. Bookmobile is split 80-20, and then we have this contract service for Nelson and Louisa that pays for the hours of the employees that work on Fridays when they drive there, and then some wear and tear for the vehicle. We have one employee that works in splits time between reference and the historical collection at the Charlottesville Albemarle Historical Society, so that's split, paid for evenly by Charlotte. And then the Mon-Ave Digital Media Lab is split between Charlottesville and Albemarle down the middle. Okay, so we'll see all of those again with the detail there. This is just the summary. So the total proposed is 9.4 million. The total cost this year, 8.9 million. So it's about a 5.7% increase driven by those factors that I discussed. And that's going to be 5.7 million for Albemarle, 2.4 for Charlottesville, 441,000 for Greene, 468,000 for Louisa, 402,000 for Nelson. Okay. The next page has a little more detail about the entire operational budget here. So you can see salaries and benefits, 7.6 million, and that's over the almost 7.2 million. So that's that increase. That's the salary, that's the raise in the pay scale, and then it's also the potential 10% increase in healthcare. So, but you can see 7.6 million out of 9.4. Most of the costs are for personnel and always have been. And then you get into the non-personnel operating costs, which is the rest of this page. You'll notice that I did a little highlight on that 130,000 that is about maybe 12 or 15 rows down. This is the money that was in the equipment budget for software that we're proposing based on the board's discussion be an operational cost shared by all 5 jurisdictions. Okay. So maybe it'd be helpful just to look at the outliers here, just to see where the changes are going to be. So that's a big one, going from $0 in the 25 budget to 130,000 in the 26 budget. Slightly less on the books end. Part of that has to do with taking some of that funding for salaries, and part of it has to do with increase in supplies for that department, which I think had been always 25,000. I think now it's 45,000.
It's the same as
This year.
Yes, we popped it up the year before.
And that's like, book tape and barcodes and things like that that happen to process materials. Jerry will give us a definition now of service contracts, which is going up by 7.3%.
Those are primarily building related maintenance and repair. And about 80% of that figure is janitorial services for Central and Gordon Library. About $120,000 of that. Others like elevator repair and other just miscellaneous repairs.
The next big bump is for rent, which is really only 2 things. It's the rent to Albemarle County for the Northside Library, and then the associated rent that we pay for the parking spaces that staff use at the Northside Library here to free up parking. And of course, we lost parking when the neighbors next door moved in. This is in the rental contract with Albemarle County. This is based on the Consumer Price Index. Basically, it's got an escalator every year, and that number has risen pretty dramatically in the last few years. So this is our expectation for fiscal year 26.
Library management services is quite the bump.
Yeah, that's the cost of the Sierra, not this person, Sierra. Sierra. The name of our integrated library system, which is the software that runs our catalog and our patron database and the bibliographic database. The 5-year contract is ending now, and so this is the bump into next year.
And is that anticipated, or it's going to be?
That's an actual, not an actual, but that's the number we got from the vendor.
They're going up 16.4.
So it's actually 2 things going on. One is we can have the exact details, but 5 years ago we made a lump sum payment in year 1, and then had flat part of the contract, flat cost for 4 years. And in the last year we added that Service Discover or some
Yeah.
another add-on to the software that is actually I believe, pay for out of the software line, so it makes that jump look a little bit more dramatic.
The other thing was that the SIP2 licenses, right, which are the cost to get machines to talk to that software. And we had to add one of those for each of the locker systems so that it knows, Brandy's here picking up this book or whatnot. Each of those was.
So in 27, will we see a lower increase?
No, I believe it'll
Or
be-
is this a steady increase
I
in the
believe
next
it'll
5
be
years?
5% a year is the current wording in the contract. That was my understanding. So this is the software itself and then the add-ons that maybe have been paid in other places, including a 5% increase. And then the contract allows for 1-year renewals and 5% increases. We might maybe go out and try to look and see what's on the market or maybe renegotiate that contract. But we attempted to renegotiate it this fall, and our buyers with the city of Charlottesville ended up looking at it and thinking that it was a better idea to use the stipulation in the contract that just said 5% for next year. So
Okay.
it is a core system though that we can't.
No.
can't do. Yeah. So whether it's paying for that software or another one, it's probably the ballpark. But that is a big number there at 16%. Otherwise, we're looking at level funding, no increases in any other category there. I do know that when Jerry goes through these, he tends to try to look at averages, what are the last 3 years of expenses here. So we're anticipating pretty stable costs across the board for the other things listed, but are there any questions about what any of those categories are or what the expenses have been or we anticipate them being?
And books are lower and just because we're not purchasing as many books.
No, because we're going to use some of the state aid funding to keep the salary issue from going to the jurisdictions, basically. So we can. This is a guess on how much we think that we're going to get from the state there. And $150,000 out of the total from the state is moved over to the administrative line for salaries. So this is a place that the board can discuss this basically. We can not do that and get that funding for books, but then we need to ask the jurisdictions for $150,000. The bottom line though, Anne, is that we have about reached the capacity for what we can buy and order with the size of the staffing that we have. It's basically Meredith and Sierra doing all the ordering there, amongst other tasks. So if we see that total increase and we used it all in the collection budget, we would need to get some more help for them as well. So I don't think it would be all in books. I think we would need to hire another person.
And that their salary would have to come out of
It would
that.
have to come out of that amount. So it's a choice here that the board can discuss, basically, but it seemed like a reasonable way for me to keep their workflow manageable. We're ordering at a pretty decent pace right now, even though, costs are rising there, and also to try to minimize the cost for our local jurisdictions. Okay. Any other questions about any of that information? Because then after this, it breaks down for each branch and department. So move on to the next page, and they're just in alphabetical order there. Barely see this on the screen. Starting with the bookmobile. So in each one of these, it'll be salaries and benefits on top, and then the operational costs. You can see here the operational costs, we're expecting the same amount. The increase is just in the salary line there. And for the next page, there are no operational costs for the Historical Society, and Charlottesville Albemarle Historical Society. That's a different building, but this employee works there and it's central number. So it's just salary. That's an easy one.
Yeah.
Central Library, it's a little bit more busy there. You can see you're gonna see basically in all of these, a salary range of like 5 to 8% changes, with 10% for health insurance. That's just a guess right now. So this is in that range. It's a little bit lower than some other areas because we've had some turnover. But you can also see that there is a 3% increase in some projected operating expenses here. Oh, right, this is what we're talking about. There's a line missing here that's called,
Not missing, actually, in the spreadsheet, the row's hidden by accident. It's another $20,000 in repairs and maintenance, which is the bottom line dollar amount is correct. It's just one row of the spreadsheet that's hidden.
and that's where the increase is, in repairs and
Oh,
maintenance.
okay, because I was saying there's all zeros here.
Yeah. So repairs and maintenance. And you're well aware that repairs and maintenance are going up annually at the central library while we await a renovation of said library. Okay, the next page is Crozet.
I mean, that's a good selling point.
Yeah, I mean, it's never gonna be,
Band-aids and glue aren't.
no, it's not gonna last
They're going
forever.
up Too, so we might
Yes.
as well fix it.
In Crozet, the entirety of the increases are salaries and benefits.
Mhm.
Same there. In case, I think you all were on the budget committee last year, is that correct? Were you on the budget committee as well? So you know that currently JMRL does support 2 different retirement plans.
Mhm.
Our current staff and our staff for the last 10+ years are only offered a 401 plan, basically, where there's an 8%
I was thinking
salary.
it was the 2 different retirement plans, which is why there's a decrease at.
Yeah, some places, right, it's exactly it. If somebody left that was on the older plan. And we still have folks that are on a pension plan that's no longer offered by the library, and that's the one that has fluctuating costs year to year. The other one is, it's either 8% if you've been here up to 5 years, and then it's 9% 5 to 10 years, and 10% the organization matches if you've been here over 10 years. So there's some variation there too, depending on the longevity of the folks in a branch of that plan. But you'll see that's why that one kind of wobbles back and forth between departments.
Minus 1.2% on retirement.
Yeah, so that's likely folks retiring that were in the pension plan, which is a more expensive thing to carry. Okay. Gordon Avenue. And the increases are in salaries and benefits. Original increases that we're anticipating, knock on wood.
There's a service contract.
Yes, that's for cleaning. Jerry, is that right?
Yeah.
That's correct.
Oh, right, there's an increase there for that amount. And those are by, that's also a known number, right? Because those folks have a contract with the city of Charlottesville. So we know what their costs are gonna be next year for Central and Gordon. Green County Branch,
The salary, correct?
yes. We had a retirement. We've had several retirements over there in the last few years, but the branch manager position changed over.
Much lower than the other branches.
Yeah, I think you'll probably see something similar when we get to Nelson as well,
Mhm.
where we had several retirements. But that's why, these things fluctuate. So if you look at the grid sheet, and Louisa's percentage is bigger, but we had in Nelson and Green, we had retirements at the branch managers in the last year. Okay, so here's the administration local, so this is just what the jurisdictions are paying for here. So why are these salaries and benefits down 20%? And this is because that $150,000 comes from
Comes
here,
from-
basically, is where it comes from, it gets reflected on that grid sheet. But that amount has been pulled out from this page, basically, so it's not being paid for by our local jurisdictions. Anything to say on the operating expenses, Jerry? Oh, here's the, the library management software, which we already discussed.
Mhm.
And also the same thing, that 130,000 that is the currently in the equipment budget. And that we're proposing we moved into the operating budget. All right, if not, on to the library admin state, it's the next line. So here's where we basically reconciled that $150,000 coming out of the library admin local. It's reflected here. This is a new line. We haven't had salary there in a long time. Lindsay was reminding me that JMRL previously did use state aid to pay salaries, but it's probably been 30 years since that time, because state aid has not been a reliable source of funding. In the last 5 years, we have seen that turn around to the point where we're expecting full funding for the first time. And we will look at this on a year-by-year basis because the last time it was fully funded, it was just for 1 year. So this is providing some relief immediately for our jurisdictions. But if the rug gets yanked out after that, then we're going to have to go back to our jurisdictions.
They have to tell them, well, we didn't get the money, so you get to pay it.
Well, I think that they understand that, especially, Louisa included in their legislative packet to the state for full funding for state aid. They understand if the state doesn't uphold their end of the bargain, then
It comes back to them.
somewhere, right?
Yeah.
I
I know Louisa's got a few things that they would like to
Yeah.
get taken care of.
Yeah, they've got it right. I think all of our jurisdictions, there are kind of state mandated funding things that they don't have much say over, but here's one where hopefully the state can uphold the bargain, it provides some amount of relief. And it pays for all the books and materials.
Mhm.
And then the other one was the $35,000 for library supplies that I mentioned. That's for processing materials. Next up, Louisa County. So no operating expenses change that we're aware of. It's all in salaries and benefits.
Surprise her.
Next up on page 12 is Mont Ave. Formerly the computer lab, now computer lab / makerspace digital media lab. This is jointly paid for by Charlottesville and Albemarle, housed in the central library. So there are no operational costs here because it's part of the central library operational costs.
So there's staff dedicated solely for that.
Yeah, there's one full-time manager, 2 part-time employees, and there's currently an open position that's split between IT and this position because they also manage the avenue.org web services. If you're a Charlottesville Albemarle nonprofit organization, you can get web hosting services through Mont Ave. So all those are paid for by Charlottesville and Albemarle. Nelson County, you can see it's not as dramatic as Green's, but also the salary increases are not in the same line as some. No changes to operational costs. No.
No, I'm looking the wrong side.
Okay. You scared me for a minute.
Yeah, I was gonna say rent. What do
Yeah, I
we
was gonna
rent?
say, what are we renting out
What are
there?
we renting out there?
Oh, for north side, I'm sure, the
Yeah,
next
that was,
page,
yeah, that was
yes.
north side. I didn't turn over the other page.
You can see similar increases in salary and benefits, and then you see the 7.5% increase in rent here. So this will be paid for 80% by Albemarle, 20% by Charlottesville. Albemarle County.
This doesn't make sense to me. But that's.
Sounds like a discussion for another day.
I
I
understand
know the other library was more, right?
which one. This is the only library we pay rent for.
But when we were at Albemarle Square.
Oh, yes, the rent for that space there. I don't think it was this much, but it was in the $700,000 a month area.
That was 5 years ago.
I think in one sense, they just moved that model over. I also kind of understand that this is one way for Albemarle to recoup the operational costs of running a building this size from Charlottesville, since 20% of that rent here is paid for by Charlottesville. When the elevator breaks here, they can kind of say, okay, well, we got our fair share from Charlottesville in order to get that out of that rent. It's not how that works for the other buildings, but it's a unique situation. And I don't think, I would be interested when the regional agreement opens again and at least looking at what they're tying the rent to, because they tie it to the CPI there, and that was a good standard for a long time, but since COVID, it's been pretty crazy and the leaps have been dramatic.
So when do they renegotiate that?
When Albemarle County wants to.
Oh, okay.
I think they're open to a discussion about it. Bottom line is they're paying 80% of it. So it kind of inflates the budget a little bit, but they're paying us to pay them basically. So it's a bit circular.
Can I add something?
Yeah, please.
The difference of being over here for us is greater because this is an Albemarle County building, so they do repairs.
Yeah.
And the other building was a rental, and so the library had to arrange all the repairs, and Albemarle County did very little. I think they change light bulbs sometimes, that kind of thing.
But here, if a light bulb needs changing, Lindsay calls the
Yeah,
county.
yeah,
Receptive, yeah.
and that's great.
Yeah, their facility staff is excellent.
Yeah,
Oh,
Albemarle County.
Well, because we're paying rent.
yeah,
Yeah, we're their
So
rental.
that does make it.
Yeah, so it makes a difference to my job. It's so much easier, and to the business manager. Jerry wasn't here back then, but the business manager had to arrange a lot of repairs. Yeah. So this works much more smoothly, and they're very responsive.
They are. Okay, page 15 is Scottsville. Part of the large increase here is the adjustment to make sure that the branch manager is going to be exempt when the overtime rules change in January. The January 1, the new exempt line is $58,000 a year in order to be not eligible for overtime. So JMRL is going to have to make some mid-year adjustments, and it's most dramatic in Scottsville.
Because they work overtime or?
They work quite a bit. The manager there works more than 40 hours a week with some regularity. They're very short-staffed and they're open a lot of hours for a branch that size. And they don't meet the threshold. So in January, they would be eligible for overtime. So instead, we're going to make their salary right, basically. And that's reflected for next year as well. Yeah, and the board recommended additional. I forgot that in Northside. Thank you. The two things that the personnel committee recommended were sub hours here and some of the personnel costs there. Thank you, Jerry.
It just makes it look more proper.
Yeah.
Because you're saying that they're hitting it, but it just wasn't reflected here.
Yeah, it wasn't showing. Same Northside especially, they were over using that budget. They were using more subs, and it worked out because there were salary savings from vacancies. But until very recently, Northside was fully staffed for a stable, long period of time, so there weren't any salary savings there.
We're losing somebody.
We poached one of our
Crozet.
own. Yeah, Crozet is hiring a shelper from Northside to move to Crozet.
Rose stole my ears.
We actually have provided many staff members other
Yes.
Krista called us the boot camp for the phrases.
All that
Or they
training.
escape.
that they-
Or they escaped, yeah.
Escaping, yeah, probably.
Okay. Tech services local, so these are the costs that are paid for by the jurisdictions there. And again, these are the folks ordering, processing materials, and our IT department. Includes also our digital collections too. The digital services manager is part of this team. Salaries and benefits are the only increase, no operational increases. And last one, tech services state. So this is state aid. These are the books there. So this is the same line, Andy, you were asking about on the overall summary sheet. The difference between ordering here. Over $1 million for books and materials is very good. Tremendous strides in state aid in the last 5 years. 5 years ago, I think it was a little over half of this amount. Okay. That's a lot of detail there. So I think the things that, the things I laid out when we started are on the table for discussion. Mary or I can answer any particular questions you all have. Otherwise,
I guess the main thing to me is we're not increasing, I just don't know this, that we're not increasing any operational expenses, basically. But yet,
Aside from
We're
things like
facing-
rent.
Huh?
Aside from things like rent.
except for rent. But we're, nationally, we're looking at a average of 7% inflation. So to me, it would seem that our operational we're spending less basically on operational.
we're pretty lean operationally.
And is that affecting services?
No, I think we've done okay there. Some of that has been, occasionally we have had, I mentioned the salary savings. Occasionally there would be salary savings if we needed. We've gone back to the board when we needed things kind of operationally to adjust to. We have a healthy equipment budget that a lot of things aren't in here. We're not asking the state or our localities to pay for. Our friends pay for the programming. So we've got a system here that helps to manage that. I think that, can we keep it at this rate forever? Probably not, but Jerry, what do you
And
think?
we also have a healthy fund balance, so
Yes.
something that can happen.
Nice job, Nick.
Otherwise,
Right.
$1,000 for XYZ. And those balances are in both in the equipment fund, the operating budget, and the $300,000 to $400,000 range each. So
In fact, after the beginning of the year, we probably will be coming back to talk about some equipment, our trucks basically, and that budget. But
Because you can't keep so much.
we can only carry over 5% of the operating budget. If we have any more than 5%, then we give it back to the jurisdiction.
And we don't want to.
Well, if it happens, we would do it, but generally, to Ann's point, we're running a pretty lean ship. We spend all the money. Most of it's on salaries, you can see.
Yeah.
But Ann, that's where the tremendous growth has been in the last few years, is trying to keep up with demands for salary. We're still significantly
I don't know.
behind.
It just had some concern that we were
Just other line items haven't gone
reducing
up.
services.
I appreciate that concern. We're not. we're not reducing services because of the operational costs. If we were gonna, because of the non-personnel operational costs.
Yeah.
If we were gonna have to reduce services moving forward, it would be in the salary line. It would be not being able to hire, retain, kind of losing staff, not being able to fill the holes. Kind of fingers in the dike when the staff moves.
So operational, the big one is just vehicle repair and then.
Well, let's see. I mean, out of the way it's defined here, the big thing is books, right? There's $1
Yeah.
million
Yeah.
out of the $3 million budget. The rest of it, and then almost $1 million is rent for this building. So except for those two things, software is a big one. You know, so you'd mentioned keeping everything static, and branch by branch it is static, but we are talking about adding $130,000 here that was equipment.
Yeah.
I think that's the biggest decision, in my mind, that's the biggest decision that this committee and the board has to make. You know, do we want to commit to that, asking for that funding operationally, because these are not equipment as we described, you know, these are tools that we need in order to provide library service for everybody.
But we're not going to see much of a change because of the expected state aid that we're going to put towards salary that's going to offset this going into our regular budget instead of talking about it in the spring.
Well, I mean, if the board approves this budget with that $130,000 there, then the equipment budget that you all will look at in the spring will be $130,000 less. But that doesn't come from, that comes entirely from revenues that JMRL gets. So it doesn't come from Charlottesville. State. It's mostly from fines and fees and from various other revenues that come in.
So the theory, the idea is eventually if we do away with fines and fees. you have
It
that
wouldn't
much
be
more
as catastrophic a
poised.
blow.
We're better poised for
Yeah.
that decision.
But that's the board's choice now.
Yeah.
You know, and the board doesn't have to commit to a fines and fees decision now, but
Right.
this allows them that flexibility to do that. But you all could also come back and say, we don't want to do that. We want to continue to collect fines and fees, and that money should come from the equipment budget. So in my mind, the three biggest, the biggest factors are the salary work that we're working on. So again, we don't have a full plan yet. Had some delays
Healthcare had
there.
gone up higher than expected last year. Remember that?
Yes, healthcare was a problem
I
last
haven't
year.
even looked to get an idea what it was looking like this year.
That might happen
Yeah.
again, you know, especially since the board is meeting a week earlier this year before Thanksgiving. The board might vote on a budget, and then the week after Thanksgiving, we might hear it's 15%, in which case that's a dramatic change. But we asked, Brandy, we asked all the jurisdictions last year if they wanted us to change that cycle, and they all said no, they'd rather get a preliminary idea and then have it updated rather than wait until later.
And I know when you and I talked to Louisa, they were already prepped for
Yes.
a higher expense.
That was, we had already talked to them with one number and then. the
And
next
then it
day-
came back, yep.
So the other four jurisdictions got the accurate number, but it's also because Kristen and Wanda usually like to schedule these things early and get the discussion.
Get it
happening.
rolling.
Yeah, get it rolling as fast as possible, so. So any discussion around that amount or around the general plan about raising everybody on the pay scale up 5% and then a raise on top of that? And these are the big factors that the board could change. They could change those numbers. They could decide to not move this money from the equipment budget. And they could potentially decide that they don't like that plan with the state aid to help offset some salaries. Those are the three major factors. The other, like the rent. Can't control it. It is what it is. You know, we need
Just like
we need to
healthcare.
buy books, just like healthcare, we need to pay healthcare. Right? So those are kind of the big picture things. If the board is not happy with the bottom lines here, that they're the puzzle pieces.
Well, as far as the 5% and 5%, 2%, whatever, 5% plus, I think a lot of our jurisdictions are having problems, getting and keeping staff, and so, if we can't offer them more money,
Eventually they'll leave.
A lot of our jurisdictional partners were able to offer raises around this amount starting in, coming out of COVID. So like 2021, 22, they had very significant bumps then, because they had some ARPA funding, they had other things, going for them at that time. And now they might have started to tail off a little bit, but we were 2%, 2%, 2% until last year. So we're kind of behind the curve. They're trying, and we always are gonna lag our jurisdictional partners in comp, basically, like they're probably always gonna pay better than JMRL will, but we don't wanna get so far behind that we can't not
Hire
only
new
recruit,
people.
but also retain
Yeah.
our current staff.
I think we're really struggling to find professional librarians because we just don't pay competitively.
Even a 5% bump in the pay scale here is not competing with a lot of our neighbors.
Jobs have gone open for long periods of time.
Because they're going to Richmond or to.
Not only that, they're going to Stanton, they're going to Waynesboro.
So how big of a difference are we looking at currently between where we currently stand and where our neighboring jurisdictions?
The last data we had was from the spring, basically, and we were looking at a 20 to 30%, depending on the
Difference?
difference, yeah. 22%, like that, using as a benchmark, so if the federal government says to be a manager and to be exempt from overtime, you need to be at $58,000, that's 22% more than our starting salary for those managers. So that's a pretty, it
So
depended
with
on
that
on
in
the
mind,
positions.
the salary bump that was discussed, I do think we need to keep that.
Yeah,
And
it's
it's a big step, but it's also baby steps in getting us.
Yeah.
it's
up
2
to where
years
we
in
need
a
to be.
row of moving in the right direction, but it's not
So-
solving the problem.
No.
Solving the problem.
And I think if we were to sit there and go to our localities and say, we want this, and the 20%, they're gonna sit there and say, no.
It's a
Whereas
matter,
if we go up,
I think to Yolita's point, they all would say, I hear you and I understand, but they all also would say, we can't afford that because we also have every other department.
Fire.
Are
fire
they
department.
also, are Charlottesville and Albemarle also raising their?
They have done so. So Charlottesville and Albemarle especially are much more competitive than they were 2 years ago. They have finished their salary work, but every other jurisdiction is somewhere in the process. But yeah, Charlottesville and Albemarle have really raised theirs quite a bit in the last few years. And now we're competing, our
I mean,
full-time,
should we be raising it more then?
our full-time circ support are making what lifeguards are making in the area. And they can't hire lifeguards because it's not enough money.
Right.
So yeah, this is, the library is really gonna have to work very hard at this over the next few years. I think without having a new salary plan to say, here's what it is, it's hard to go and say, oh, we need all this much more money. So this is, to me, a reasonable intermediary step to try and get our current staff and the staff that we're trying to hire up there, even though it's expensive. It's not nearly as expensive as a plan, but we can't, without a plan, nobody's gonna fund a request
Right.
either. It's my opinion.
But are like Louisa and Nelson, are there jurisdictions raising their employees'
I cannot
salaries by
answer that.
more than 5%?
I know Louisa had to do a mid-year
I
allocation.
know we just had a major bump in our taxes. I can say that, but
Yeah.
They had to do a mid-year allocation to keep up with their, with the sheriff's department and the fire and
They have a
rescue.
lot of
things like that.
needs.
Because they were losing those types of employees to neighboring localities, so they're facing similar issues.
Yeah, and I think Nelson, I know like last year, Nelson, even with the bump, the other, like, the fire department and the police department, all of those, they got more. More than 5%. Or two, they got the 2%. When we got 2%, everybody else got 5%. And.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
think that's what I was trying to say, is that, right, they started coming right out of COVID. A lot of them had access to federal funding that they used to try to keep salaries up when it was really competitive there. So we were static at that point when they were moving up.
right.
So we're trying to close the gap.
I guess what I'm trying to say is, if the jurisdictions in JMRL there's other employees have gone up so much, they can't complain about
the library's, salaries going up more than 5%? Or do you think this is?
So I
the
think
safest?
if I understand what the 5%, that is like across the board, that, so
For all
starting with a new
jurisdictions?
person,
Yes.
Yeah.
shelving books, they
Right.
start at like $19 an hour.
Yeah.
Now, we raised, everybody says $19 plus 5% is the starting pay. And then across the board, it's, everybody's getting the 2% in the new year, and when fiscal year
Yeah,
26
our
starts.
current staff will see, if this budget passes as it is drafted today, would see a 7% increase. And then see the pay scale raise and then 2% raise on top. I think that's a reasonable amount. Last year was either a 5 or a 7% increase, so that would be 2 years. Even for new staff, it would be 10% over 2 years. That's certainly moving in the right direction. So that 20 to 30%, would be 20%.
And so going the way that we're going in a couple of years, we should be at the point where we can be competitive and.
And the pay scale going up helps us with the subs. Subs never get a raise unless the pay scale goes up. So for the last few years, subs have not gotten any raise at all.
They haven't had an increase in 5 years.
So
This is a
by
nice
telling
bump for them.
yes, if the pay
Yeah.
scale goes up, all of our subs who we rely on, more, we do need them. I mean, and you can say Scottsville needs subs because they don't have enough staff. We've used subs a lot in the last few years because we had so much turnover. I've hired 30 people in the last 4 years. And sometimes over and over and over,
Same people.
Same
So,
position.
and you're asking the right question. It's a problem, and we could either go at it full
I mean, that's
bore.
what the personnel committee
Yeah.
did. They've already gone through this.
They went through this to some extent, but mostly the personnel committee was talking about and at the same time, we're telling our managers not to ask for too much more, because we can't add on new services, hours, more staff, that then are gonna be behind, so we need to try and kind of stabilize where we are, get everything up to a reasonable level and then move forward. But yeah, it's not a drop in the bucket, it's a step in the right direction, but we're probably still several years away from, even at this type of increase year after year, being competitive. And in the meantime, that
Everybody else.
the
is
competition is moving as well.
moving up as well.
To me, it was Stanton's that was pretty eye-opening year before last, when they have a much smaller, it's a single branch library system, but their starting librarians are making more than some of our long-term managers have, realizing that, people that are coming out of library school that want to live in this area and work in this area, they can't afford it.
Cost of living.
Cost of living
Right.
here.
So, the line department,
Say it again?
the line department of the city.
Yes, they are, right. So when the city goes up.
When it's generally like, it's not like, oh, the library is asking this and other city departments again, they're all part of the same pool, I think.
Yeah. Good point.
I think what we have in our favor, though, is that people like the idea of working in a library. For a lot of people, it's a very appealing kind of job.
Yeah, but we don't want to just depend on that, because, after a while, I love to work here, but I can't afford to
Yeah.
take care of my family.
And that's why we have turnover. And we have good benefits.
Yeah.
That's a great point. I mean, we have
Yeah,
very,
yeah,
very
really
good
good benefits.
healthcare and an excellent retirement system for these days. But
And
that
our
doesn't,
part-time
that
staff.
doesn't pay the rent. It doesn't put the food in.
Is
In fact, QVA doesn't pay healthcare for part-time staff, so.
So these are bigger picture items. This, I think it's about the top of what would be considered reasonable without a whole new salary structure plan. And I told the board, right, that we're working with the city of Charlottesville's head of HR on that.
I was
And that
gonna
person
ask how
left.
that was.
Well, that person left and they don't have a new head of HR at this point. So we're a little bit in
So that was
the,
like 1 year, that person there for us.
I think it was almost 2 years.
Okay.
Did a lot of great stuff. Rewrote their personnel manual for the first time in almost 30 years. Did a lot, redid their salary structure, so accomplished a lot in a short period of time. But this was one of the projects that left a bit straight. Okay, anyway, so it sounds like we're okay with those numbers and the whole board, we'll probably relitigate most of this again with the whole board. And what about the software costs here and the state aid? Any discussion on that? Any desire that Jerry or I change any of those numbers from what you're looking at?
That just makes sense.
I personally think it's fine that it works there and it's going to make everything like, because we do have an ongoing discussion for the possibility of reducing the fees and fines or eliminating them.
Yeah.
It just makes sense to put it into this budget here.
Yeah, and I think it's two birds with one stone there because really they don't belong with the fund
No.
anymore because it's not a thing.
Mm-mm.
I think when we're talking with the jurisdictions, mention that, like, here's what we're talking about. We're talking about our email. We're talking about
Or operating software that makes us.
our antivirus software. The software on the computers, on the public computers to make sure that when you save stuff, it doesn't actually save to things like that. Web hosting, it's not, that used to be you bought a server and you had it here, but now it's you pay a company to manage it out in the cloud. So. Okay, any more discussion about the draft budget then? Peter, are you still there?
Yep, yeah, this all looks good to me.
Okay,
I would make the motion that we take this as is to the board.
the one thing we can do actually is fix the retirement number before we send it to the whole board. So just this entire thing will be $500. That's an insignificant amount for most of the jurisdictions. We'll get that tweaked and then send this to the full board.
I'm making sure the one line item is not there is.
Oh, yeah, thank you. Thank you.
Oh, yeah.
Anything else you want to talk about?
No, I think that's it, I guess.
Here's your gavel. Oh,
Somebody
you left it over there.
Motion to adjourn.
Is that it?
Yeah. I think we can take this to the board with those two sections.
Okay.
Nice, easy and early.
Okay.
What time is it?
3:30.
Thank you all. Thank you, Peter.
Yep, thank you.